Here I am at the end. And at the beginning, oh, they're both the same. I guess it was always going to be this way. I mean, it had to be this, didn't it? It had to be you. Both of you.
So nice to finally meet you, Spider-Man.
With the home release of Spider-Man Far From Home and the whole Sony Marvel breakup recently, there's been a lot of talk about Spider-Man's on-screen history recently. But you know what I never hear people talking about for some reason? The Amazing Spider-Man trilogy, duology. But instead of just looking at those films as Spider-Man films, I want to look at the director behind those films. Which is why we're going to be looking at this man, the ever so perfectly named Marc Webb. Now, while you might not initially recognise his name, you've probably seen some of his work before. What I want to do is look at Webb's work outside of the Amazing Spider-Man films and see if we can have a better understanding of what he was trying to do in those films. Oh, and spoilers ahead for everything that I'm going to talk about. 500 Days of Summer is Webb's first narrative piece, and looking at 500 Days, it's pretty clear why Webb went from music videos to this film. The film has a lot of musical influences in it, with dance numbers and experimental ways of shooting that you would really only see in music videos nowadays. The film itself is an unconventional love story of a couple who didn't end up working out, told in a non-linear way. Now, we've already seen two things that are repeated over and over again in Webb's work: music and romance. The idea itself could have been done in a number of ways, but what we see Webb doing is portraying the couple as very normal and unremarkable. Now, I mention this because instead of it being a common theme of what Webb does in his work, it actually contradicts a lot of things he goes on to do. Doing research for this, I found that there were a number of themes that kept cropping up in Webb's work, and I expected this to be one of them, but it really wasn't. Usually a director's first film is a really good roadmap for everything that they're going to do after that, but while the music and romance elements do follow through into his other works, you would expect the subversive elements to follow through as well, but they don't really go outside of this film. It's interesting to look at Webb's 2 episodes of Limitless and see the mindset that he's in just after coming off the last Spider-Man film. The show basically showcases one of Webb's greatest elements, where he starts everything that he does. In a lot of his works there seems to be big puzzles and unanswered questions hanging over the stories, even though they might not be immediately related to the plot. In 500 Days, the puzzle is to get with, or get back with, Summer. In Limitless, it's the procedural element of the crime each week having to be solved by this person who's hyper-intelligent. Webb has stated before that his narratives always have a puzzle to solve, and you will always follow the person who is going to solve that puzzle. But apart from introducing the puzzle solving, Limitless really isn't like anything Webb has done before or will do again. There's actually a TV show that incorporates more of Webb's tropes, and it's actually done around the same time that Limitless was. My Crazy Ex-Girlfriend is a musical romance TV show that you don't watch, but you know that a friend of a friend tells you that it's actually really good. It's fine. Webb has admitted that growing up, he basically went to watch musicals quite often with his parents, so it was only really a matter of time before he did a musical. Whereas 500 Days did incorporate a few of those elements, My Crazy Ex-Girlfriend is a full-on musical every episode. While Webb is not the creator of the show, he does get an executive producer tag on each episode, which means that the 2 episodes that he directed, he probably had some creative sway over. He's extremely qualified for the job after all. He's a music video director, and in those episodes, he really does pull out the stops on making big musical numbers. While this and Limitless are cheaper than the bigger movie stuff that he's done, it is interesting to look at these and see how he did them. But apart from a few creative camera flares and things, Webb really probably wasn't involved in the creative side of these. On a podcast in 2016, Webb talked about his creative work up until that point, and this is how he mentions his TV work.
You were hungry for that after doing the big ones?
Yeah. I wanted to be careful. I wanted to be cautious, and I felt like I could do that. So, I don't know, moving forward, I do some TV stuff.
So, if Marc Webb doesn't even spend time talking about his TV work, why did I dwell on it for a while? I think it's because I wanted to show that Webb does have a creative voice in everything that he does. That even the projects he picks have similar elements and themes running throughout them. So, after a number of fairly big budget mainstream projects, Gifted was a return to form to the smaller low budget indie filmmaking that Webb started with. It's also the first time we see him really play around in the real world instead of having a more fantastical world to set his pieces in. The film itself is almost a meta commentary on a lot of the tropes that Webb uses. Now I know that sounds really pretentious, but just bear with me, okay? The film's namesake comes from a young character named Mary, who is gifted, who lives with her uncle in Florida. The story begins when her grandmother, a maths professor, comes to visit for the first time in her life. She introduces Mary to the Navier-Stokes problem, which is one of the 7 millennium problems that haven't been solved in maths yet. Her grandmother wants Mary to follow in her mother's footsteps and try and solve the Navier-Stokes problem. So that sounds like a film Webb would make, right? It's all about solving puzzles. Well, no, because what I just said is not actually the plot of the film. The real plot of the film is a custody battle between the uncle and the grandmother about who should get care over Mary. But most of the story actually focuses on Mary and her uncle and the relationship between them. The whole idea of her solving problems is actually put by the wayside and is a detriment to them. Webb seems to have put all of his tropes to one side or used them in different ways than he's used to. Even the way he shoots the film is completely different. It's less harsh and more natural. Because the film is done in this way, it seems to feel a lot more personal to Webb, and there's a reason why that is. Growing up, both of Webb's parents were in the field of maths or science, so he heard this growing up. It was what he grew up around. If there was ever a film that he was going to deviate on, it was going to be something that had autobiographical elements to it. Now, I actually don't think that Webb intentionally is doing a meta commentary on all of his tropes. In fact, I think he might have actually picked the script because it had the elements that he liked in there. But it's interesting to see that he can approach these tropes from a different direction and have a very different kind of film, even with similar ideas being there. If Gifted was a meta-commentary on the tropes and stylings of Webb, then The Only Living Boy in New York is a complete parody of every single one of them. I watched this film after watching most of his other work, and I'd enjoyed everything up until that point, really. And the thing is, there was one thing going through my head the entire time. This cannot be as bad as people say it is. It is. A lot of Webb's tropes are in there, but they're done so poorly or ham-fistedly, it's almost laughable at times. The mystery surrounding Jeff Bridges' character is laughable when it is resolved. The romance story is troubled at best and boring at worst. The music choices are so on the nose that I basically got a double fracture from just watching it. Oh, jeez, oh, Christ, oh. Yeah, it's that bad. It just proves that with all of his other works, Webb had this really good balance of all of his tropes, and nothing was too much and nothing went too far. And who would have thought a film named after a Simon and Garfunkel song was pretentious? So, what have we learned from Webb by watching all of this? We've learned that he has 3 main tropes, and no matter what he does, some of those tropes are going to be in those projects. But unlike some directors out there, Webb doesn't have a story he's telling over and over again. He sticks to his tropes. Unless I'm missing something. Maybe there is a story he's trying to tell. Maybe he's trying to tell his story over and over again. And maybe... Oh no. Oh no. There I am at the end. And at the beginning, oh, they're both the same. I guess it was always going to be this way. I mean, it had to be this, didn't it? It had to be you.